Welcome to Backbone Unlimited. My name is Matt Hartsky. In this episode, we're going to break down one of the most common and rarely talked about reasons elk seasons fall apart for a lot of hunters, and that's showing up with a summer mindset in a September world. I want to walk through this honestly because if you've ever stepped into the season with high confidence, high hopes, and a picture in your head of how it should unfold, only to watch everything dissolve in the first 48 hours, you're not alone. I think almost every hunter has been there at some point, including me. September has a way of exposing every assumption we carry into the woods. It forces us to face the gap between what we expect and what elk are actually doing. Most guys want the hunt to feel smooth. They want the elk to talk. They want their e-scouted spots to pan out. They want bulls to follow their script. They want the temperature, the wind, and the pressure, and the herd dynamics to line up just right. And sometimes they do. But more often, September teaches us a different lesson. The mountain doesn't care what we expected. Elk don't care what we hoped for. And no matter how badly we want things to go a certain way, elk respond only to the world they're living in, not the one we planned for. So today I'm breaking down 4 big mindset traps that cause hunters to implode early in the season. Pressure expectations versus reality, thinking elk should be somewhere instead of proving it, comfort zone hunting, and not adapting to the mood of the herd. If this was one of the reasons your elk season didn't come together this year, you'll know by the end of this episode, and more importantly, you'll know exactly how to fix it before next season rolls around. So let's get into it. In section 1, we're going to talk about pressure expectations versus reality. One of the biggest disconnects I see every single September is that hunters show up expecting elk behavior that simply doesn't exist under real-world pressure. They picture bulls bugling across the canyon, cows moving slowly through pockets of timber, and undisturbed patterns like you see in videos. The problem here is pretty simple. In a lot of units, maybe most units, the pressure ramps up long before you arrive. Even in more remote country, those elk have already been bumped by early season archers, muzzleloader hunters, local pressure, trailhead traffic, or summer scouting even. Their movement is tighter. Their vocalization drops. Their travel routes shift into security cover. They're more nocturnal. They're more cautious. And they're already tuning into the thermals and wind direction like their life depends on it, because it literally does. But hunters don't always walk into the hunt expecting that level of difficulty. They show up with a summer mindset. A summer mindset is when you expect elk to behave like they did in your August trail cam photos or like they did during your preseason scouting trip. But summer elk are sloppy. They're visible. They feed openly. They talk more. They tolerate more disturbance. September elk are the opposite. By the time most hunters arrive, those bulls are already living October level caution. When you show up expecting easy interactions or expecting bulls to bugle back just because you want them to, it takes about 24 to 48 hours of reality before frustration sets in. Guys start pushing too hard. They call too much. They hike too fast. They abandon good areas because the elk aren't acting right. The fix is simple but difficult. Show up expecting elk to be pressured before you ever arrive. Expect careful elk. Expect tight windows. Expect smart bulls. Expect unpredictability and expect silence, because that's the biggest complaint I heard this past year. Because when you expect pressure, you don't get rattled when you encounter it. You get tactical instead of emotional. And that's what September demands. In section 2, we're going to talk about thinking elk should be somewhere instead of proving it. This is another silent killer of elk seasons. Hunters walk into a spot because they scouted it in August. They saw elk there last year. It looks good on a map. It's where everyone says elk should be during the rut. But September doesn't care about any of that. Elk aren't living in the world of should. They're living in the world of pressure, water availability, herd dynamics, predators, food quality, thermals, micro-terrain security, and the daily wind cycle. I've seen incredible looking basins that should hold elk with absolutely nothing in them, and I've seen the opposite, nasty overlooked pockets that shouldn't hold anything, but they're loaded every year. The truth is this: the moment you start hunting the picture in your head instead of what's in front of you, you're hunting ghosts. Every failed elk season has a moment where the hunter realizes, I spent too much time believing elk should have been here instead of proving they were here. The fix is methodical. Don't assume anything. Elk don't read topo lines. They don't owe you consistency. So start every hunt by proving elk are in your zone. Fresh sign, fresh rubs, fresh tracks, fresh poop, and don't waste the day. Run a fast area evaluation and not a hopeful one. One ridge, one basin, one pocket. Move with purpose, but don't drift aimlessly. Follow fresh sign, even if it takes you places you didn't plan on hunting. Elk movement trumps your plan always. When you stop hunting where elk should be and start hunting where elk are, your success rate skyrockets instantly. This is the shift a lot of hunters never make. In section 3, we're going to talk about comfort zone hunting. This one hits a little harder because it's honest. Comfort kills elk seasons. Every hunter has terrain preferences. Maybe it's open ridges, meadows, glassing knobs, south faces, gentle slopes, familiar country. But elk don't care where you want to be. They care where they feel safe. And for pressured elk, safe almost always means steep timber, north faces, dark pockets, deadfall jungles, thick benches, side hill bedding zones, mid-slope security cover. Most hunters avoid those areas because they're physically harder. They're mentally harder. They're slow to hunt. They're hot. They're dark. They're uneven. They're difficult to navigate. And because they're hard for humans, they're perfect for elk. Every year, guys spend 5 days hunting elk country instead of hunting elk. What I mean is this: they stay in terrain they can move through easily, terrain where they can bugle easily, terrain where they can glass easily, maybe terrain where they can navigate easily. But elk spend their time where it's uncomfortable. If you want to kill pressured bulls, you have to step into the areas where other hunters tap out. You have to leave your comfort zone at the trailhead. You have to be willing to hunt terrain that doesn't look good on Instagram but looks perfect to a bull that's been bumped 3 times already. Comfort is convenient. Comfort feels good. Comfort keeps you optimistic. But comfort doesn't kill elk. Effort does. Intentional movement does. Commitment does. That's the shift. In section 4, the last one, we're not adapting to the mood of the herd. This is one of the biggest overlooked pieces of September. Every single herd on the mountain has its own mood. Some are fired up. Some are semi-active, or others are silent, paranoid, pressured, maybe nocturnal, defensive. Others are aggressive or curious or completely shutting down. But most hunters run only one gear. They hunt with one calling style. They move at one speed. They expect one kind of response. What kills elk hunters is trying to force a mood onto a herd that isn't feeling it. If the herd is quiet and you're aggressive, you blow them out. If the herd is fired up and you're passive, you miss the opportunity. If the herd is pressured and you bugle from exposed terrain, they slip away silently. If the herd is curious and you're silent, you never get the interaction. The best hunters adapt instantly. If the bulls are reluctant to bugle, they ease up. If the cows are nervous, they go silent. If a satellite is circling, they adjust position. If the herd bull is defensive, they tighten the loop. If the cows are feeding calmly, they move slow and patient. Most years, elk aren't in the mood you want them in. But if you match the mood they're actually in, the hunt stabilizes. You'll stay in the game longer. You'll stay in the herd's space longer, and you'll get more real opportunities. This is the mental flexibility September demands. Showing up with the summer mindset in a September world is one of the most common ways elk hunters sabotage themselves. It creates false expectations, rushed decisions, and emotional hunting. But the fix is completely within your control. If you walk into next season expecting elk to be pressured, expecting them to be cautious, expecting them to live where you don't want to go, and expecting them to behave differently than last year, everything changes. You stop fighting the mountain and start hunting it. If your season didn't work out this year, this mindset shift alone can rebuild your entire September approach. Welcome to Backbone Unlimited. My name is Matt Hartsky. In this episode, we're breaking down the single biggest root cause behind almost every failed elk season: not understanding elk movement. I don't care what unit you hunt, how much you train, what tag you drew, or how strong your calling game is. If you misread elk movement, seasonal movement, daily movement, or pressure-based movement, you are always one step behind. And when you're behind in September, the odds stack hard against you. Every year, guys message me saying the same thing. I scouted hard, I had them patterned, I watched bulls in that basin all summer, and when I showed up in September, everything was empty. Or I was into elk early, then they vanished overnight and I never found them again. Or the classic, we located a bull 3 mornings in a row, then nothing, like he teleported. Elk obviously don't teleport. They don't disappear. They move with purpose. They shift with pressure, and they adjust to the wind cycle. They pivot instantly when the herd dynamic changes, and they rarely stay in the same pattern once human presence enters their world. Today, we're going to break this down in a way that rebuilds the entire foundation of how you approach elk behavior. We're going to cover why bulls vanish from glassing spots, why they go nocturnal faster than most hunters realize, how pressure forces them into security cover, and why most hunters spend September hunting where elk were instead of where elk are. If you felt like elk movement kept you off balance this year, like you were always half a step too slow, this is probably the reason your season didn't work out. So let's get into the truth about elk movement. In section 1, we're going to talk about why bulls vanish from glassing spots. One of the most frustrating parts of elk hunting is watching a basin that was loaded in August or early September suddenly go dead, silent, and empty. Guys treat this like some mysterious phenomenon, but there's nothing mysterious about it. Bulls vanish from glassing spots for one primary reason: the pattern you scouted was never a September pattern to begin with. Summer patterns are visible, sloppy, and food-driven. Bulls are feeding openly, bedding in predictable rotations, using visible trails, moving earlier and later, living lower on the mountain than people think, grouping up with other bulls, traveling with far less caution. You know, it feels stable, it feels predictable, it feels promising, but it's almost always temporary. Once September hits, everything changes. The food source shifts. Elk move from open feed to nutrient-dense shading feed pockets. They're not living in alpine meadows anymore unless pressure is non-existent. Thermals stabilize earlier. Morning thermals drop harder and sooner, which pushes elk off exposed faces into safer beds. Cow groups start influencing movement. If cows aren't in that basin, bulls aren't going to stay there long. Human pressure rises. Even just boots, glassing pressure, or road traffic pushes them from open basins into timbered side hills and fingered drainages. So when bulls disappear, they didn't leave the unit. They just slid into terrain that fits the phase they're actually entering. Glassing spots are incredible in July and August. They're less reliable once calling starts. And by mid-September, they're often vacant, not because elk left, but because their world shrinks into timbered pockets, benches, and dark north faces. If your season fell apart early, this might have been the first domino. In section 2, we're going to talk about why elk go nocturnal faster than a lot of guys think. Elk are naturally crepuscular, meaning most activity happens around dawn and dusk, but pressured elk develop a different layer on top of that. They learn to shift everything into darkness. Most hunters underestimate how fast it actually happens. So here's what triggers the shift to nocturnal movement: opening week pressure. The first spike in foot traffic and calling knocks them one layer deeper into cover. They're still in the same general area, but they're moving under the cover of darkness. Headlamps and drainages. Nothing educates elk faster than a string of headlamps marching into the same access corridor every morning. Bugling at 4 a.m. Hunters trying to locate bulls before daylight accidentally teach elk exactly when to shut up. ATV traffic. Noise patterns condition elk to feed earlier and retreat faster. A single blown stalk. A mature bull learns instantly. One wrong wind swirl and he'll shift his movement timing by hours. When people say elk went nocturnal, what they usually mean is the elk are still in the same ridge system. They're still feeding, they're still rutting, they're still moving, they're still active, They're just doing it at night. And there's the painful truth to this. A lot of hunters don't actually realize this is happening. They show up late to their glassing knob. They move too slowly in the morning. They expect elk to stay visible longer than they do. They think elk should still be out, but the window's already gone. Fixing this requires brutal discipline, being in position before the first hint of gray light, reducing morning noise, approaching bedding routes instead of morning feed, identifying escape trails, hunting the edge of security zones, not the edge of meadows. If the elk in your unit went quiet or disappeared early in the day, this might have been the culprit. They didn't stop moving, they just shifted the movement before you actually got there. In section 3, we're going to talk about how pressure forces elk into security cover, because when elk hunters talk about pressure, they often think about human pressure only, but pressure is multi-layered. You've got your human pressure and then other predator activity, but you've got heat, wind instability, scent contamination, cow stress, bull competition, noise patterns. Every one of those pressures pushes elk into more secure terrain. Security cover is the number one most misunderstood concept amongst new elk hunters. Security cover isn't where elk feed, or where elk water, or where elk are easiest to glass, or where trails look good, or where calling sounds travel well. Security cover is the place elk go when they don't feel safe anywhere else. It usually looks like steep benches, nasty side hill bedding pockets, north-facing timber, dark holes with a lot of deadfall, mid-slope shelves you'd walk past without noticing, timbered fingers between drainages, pockets shielded by swirling thermals. Those are not fun places for humans to hunt, which is exactly why elk love them. In pressured units, elk live full-time in security cover. They might feed out into openings, but they don't spend much time there and they return fast. Hunters struggle here because they expect elk to rotate between meadows, wallows, maybe high ridges, or more open terrain. But pressured elk rarely do predictable loops. They live tight, they stay dark, they move inside terrain that gives them a constant wind advantage. If you felt like elk vanished every time your unit got busy, this is probably why. They didn't leave the drainage, they dropped into the nasty stuff you avoid. In section 4, we want to talk about why hunters hunt where elk were instead of where elk are. This is the mistake that sabotages more hunts than anything else. It's the final domino, and almost everybody falls into it at least once. Hunters hunt last year's wallow, last year's rub line, yesterday's bugle, last night's tracks, the meadow they saw elk in earlier, the basin they scouted pre-season, the drainages that look textbook, the terrain they like most. But elk don't care about any of that. Elk live in a dynamic world where pressure, thermals, wind, herd structure, food availability, and noise all change daily. Most hunters are one step and sometimes 2 or 3 steps behind real-time elk movement. Here's the truth a lot of people don't want to admit. Elk movement is fast, faster than hunters want to believe. A bull can shift 400 yards with one bad wind swirl, half a drainage overnight, a full ridge with a single human encounter, an entire basin after a single blown call setup. Movement is fluid, it's reactive, and it's situational. Hunters who expect elk to follow loops or stay in patterns set themselves up for failure. Elk don't follow loops. They follow safety. This is why successful hunters do 4 things extremely well. They adapt their plan the moment new information shows up. Not tomorrow, not later, right now. They track fresh sign with full commitment. If it's warm, soft, moist, or recent, they follow it. They abandon old intel instantly. Just because elk were there doesn't mean they are there. They hunt movement, not locations. Locations are static. Elk aren't. If you want to fix your season next year, learn to treat elk like moving animals, not stationary targets. You're not hunting a spot, you're hunting a pattern of behavior that changes constantly. The moment you shift into that mindset, you start finding elk you would have walked past before. Not understanding elk movement is the silent killer of September. It makes good hunters feel like they're failing. It hides elk in plain sight. It creates frustration, doubt, and confusion. But elk movement isn't random, and it's not mysterious once you understand what drives it. Elk don't vanish, they adjust. They don't get impossible, they get very cautious. They don't leave the unit, they move deeper into security. They don't stop rutting, they stop doing it where you can see them easily. If your season didn't work out because you couldn't stay with the herd, this is the blueprint for fixing that. Because once you understand how elk move, you stop chasing ghosts and start anticipating the next chess move before it actually happens. Welcome to Backbone Unlimited. My name is Matt Hartsky. In this episode, we're digging into what I believe is the most unforgiving, most underestimated, and most season-ending mistake elk hunters make, and that's misreading the wind and thermals. You can have the right setup, the right bull, the right calling sequence, the right timing, and still watch the entire opportunity evaporate because of one tiny mistake in how you approach the wind. It happens every single year. For me, it happens to brand new hunters, it happens to experienced hunters, and it even happens to guys who killed bulls the year before. Because the wind isn't just a factor in elk hunting, it's the entire game. You can fool elk with sound, you can fool elk with movement, you could even fool elk with decoys, but you cannot fool their nose. And that's why today we're going deep into the truth about how morning downhill air works, how midday switches happen, why drainages trap your scent, how micro-terrain shapes wind differently than the macro forecast, and how pressured elk used wind as an actual shield. But before we break down the details, we need to start with the single most important law of thermals that almost every September a lot of hunters ignore. Here's the rule. Thermals follow the temperature of the slope. In the morning, thermals fall until the sun warms the hillside. Once the sun heats the slope, thermals rise. Late in the day, when shadows hit and the hillside cools, thermals fall again. And here's the golden hunting rule tied to it. When thermals are falling, you must approach from below the elk. When thermals are rising, you must approach from above the elk. That way your scent gets carried away in either situation. Side hill approaches can work either way, but only when micro-terrain breaks and wind deflection give you enough protection to stay undetected. If you ignore this rule, the law of the wind and thermals, nothing else in this episode matters. But when you understand it and start structuring your entire hunt around it, elk encounters become predictable instead of chaotic. Now let's break each part down. In section 1, we're going to talk about morning falling air and why early setups fail a lot of times. Most hunters blow their first opportunity of the day because they don't respect the morning downhill air. Before the sun hits the slope, all air is cooling and cold air falls. It moves down ridges, down fingers, down chutes, down the face of every hill in the shade. Even when the general wind is calm, the thermal is doing its own quiet work, sliding straight towards the elk's nose, right? If the sun hasn't hit the hillside yet, you're not sneaking into elk from above. You're sneaking your scent to them. This is the classic early morning mistake. Hunters hear a bugle, right? They get excited. They charge down the hill. Their scent is falling right into the bull's path, and the herd vanishes before they even get the setup started. People think the bull just moved or cut his cows earlier than expected. No, he smelled you. Morning thermals falling downhill are responsible for half the blown encounters in elk hunting. The fix: if the slope is still cool, shaded, you must approach from below. Stay lower, stay patient. Let the sun flip the thermals before making your move. And if you can't approach from below, you wait or you try the side hill, period. Discipline saves more opportunities than aggressive calling ever will. In section 2, we're going to talk about midday thermal switches, the silent killer of stalks. Once the sun hits the slope fully and starts warming the hillside, could be 8 a.m., could be 9 a.m., could be 10 a.m., just depends, right, on what the sun actually does in that spot. They don't flip like a switch, they transition, sometimes slowly, sometimes unpredictably, sometimes with a short stall where the wind feels like it's doing nothing. This is where so many midday stalks die. Hunters think because the sun is up and thermals are rising that everything's going to be okay, but oftentimes there's a lag, and elk know that lag better than you do. A hillside may be warming, but the draw directly next to it might still be draining cold air. A ridgetop might be heating, but one shaded cut on the backside is still falling. A chute may be mixed, half rising, half falling, depending on how the sunlight reaches it. This creates what I call the thermal chaos window, that 20 to 60-minute period when thermals don't know what they want to do. Elk bed during this window for one reason. It's the worst time for predators to approach without being scented. This is exactly why the golden rule matters so much. When thermals rise, you must approach from above. When thermals fall, you must approach from below. Midday switches determine which side of the mountain you should even be on. If you're on the wrong side, the elk win every time. And when you get a bull talking during a switch, most hunters rush the setup. They want it now. But this is when discipline separates the guys who get opportunities from the guys who educate the elk. You wait until the thermals stabilize. You do not move into the herd until you know the direction of the air. Rising thermals are your ally here, but only once they've actually arrived and remained steady. In section 3, we're going to talk about drainage traps, where scent goes to die. Drainages destroy more elk hunts than calling mistakes, not because they're unpredictable, but because they're too predictable. Here's why drainages are so dangerous. They channel air. They accelerate falling thermals. They amplify rising thermals. They carry scent further than normal wind, and they collect scent from every side hill slope feeding into them. A drainage is like a scent superhighway. You might think you're skirting the creek bottom, or paralleling a herd, or trying to cut off a bugling bull, or creeping up a draw to get closer for a setup. But the entire time, your scent might be being funneled downhill into the straight shot, and an elk uses that funnel like motion detectors. This is one reason pressured elk rarely bed in drainages. They bed just above them, catching both the drainage flow and the wind swirling off the upper slope. If you enter a drainage when thermals are falling, you're probably done. Nothing you do will save the encounter. Drainages also have delayed sunlight, meaning they warm slower, they switch later, and they fall earlier in the afternoon. The translation here is that drainage thermal schedule is not the same as the hillside schedule. A lot of hunters don't account for this. The fix is to avoid them during falling thermals unless you're below the elk. Avoid them during rising thermals unless you're above the elk. And most importantly, never stalk through a drainage. Always use the ridges and side hills flanking it. In section 4, we're going to talk about micro-terrain wind behavior, where hunts are won and lost. Micro-terrain is where wind becomes unpredictable and where a lot of hunters underestimate what's actually happening around them. I'm talking about small cuts, benches, folds, finger ridges, rock outcrops, depressions, little pockets of timber. These tiny features shape wind and thermals differently than the surrounding slope. You can have rising thermals on the open slope and falling thermals in the shaded cut, swirling thermals in a bowl, sideways drift on a bench, vertical drop-offs that pull scent downward. This is why elk bed in micro-terrain pockets. The wind is inconsistent for predators, but highly consistent for elk. A bull bedded on a half-moon bench may catch falling air from above, rising air from the lower slope, a slightly lateral drift from the finger ridge, a stable breeze from the main drainage. It creates almost a 360-degree scent shield. This is the setup elk choose on purpose. Most hunters think they're being sly. Elk see that movement in their wind map before you ever take a step. The fix isn't avoiding microterrain, it's understanding when thermals are stable enough to move into it and knowing how the golden rule applies. Approaching from above only works when the rising thermals dominate that pocket. Approaching from below only works when falling thermals dominate that pocket. Side hill approaches are the only flexible option, but also require you to test the wind constantly because a single micro cut can ruin everything. In section 5, we're going to talk about how pressured elk use the wind as a shield. This is the part of wind behavior a lot of hunters never even recognize. Pressured elk actively position themselves using the wind as a defensive shield. A pressured bull will bed where thermals hit him directly, feed where rising thermals give him the advantage, travel routes where he gets the downhill pull, stand in positions where he can scent check below and hear above, circle a calling setup to get the wind, slow his pace when he suspects something, and disappear into terrain where the wind constantly swirls to his benefit. Elk don't just respond to wind, they weaponize it. When you hear a bull circle you, he isn't wandering, he's using thermals like a radar. When a herd drops into dark timber in the late afternoon, they're not bedding early. They're positioning themselves for the evening falling air they know is coming. When a bull hangs up at 80 yards away, he's not stubborn, he's waiting for your scent. When a herd moves off the face earlier than you expect, it's because the hillside is about to lose sunlight and they know how the thermals are about to fall. Pressured elk don't just pay attention to sound. They don't just pay attention to movement. They trust one thing above all else: the wind. If your season fell apart because elk kept winding you, this is probably why. They weren't just lucky, they weren't random, they were using the mountain better than you were. Most hunters think the elk beat them, but the truth is the thermals beat them. Once you understand how falling morning air works, how rising air stabilizes, how drainage thermals trap scent, how microterrain alters wind patterns, how pressured elk use wind intentionally, you're going to no longer hunt elk with hope, you're going to hunt them with more clarity. So the rule here is non-negotiable. Falling thermals equal approach from below. Rising thermals equal approach from above. Side hills are when you can read the microterrain perfectly. If you ignored that rule, it probably cost you opportunities this year. If you master it, you will create opportunities you used to believe were impossible. Welcome to Backbone Unlimited. My name is Matt Hartsky. In this episode, we're breaking down one of the most emotionally charged and misunderstood parts of elk hunting: whether you should call more, call less, or not call at all. Overcalling and undercalling ruin more encounters than bad shooting, bad wind, or bad setups. They happen because hunters try to force elk into a script instead of responding to what the elk are actually doing in the moment. Calling is situational. Calling must match your role, solo, paired, or full team. Calling must match herd dynamics. Calling must match the mood of the bull. Calling must match the terrain, thermals, and proximity. But most hunters don't evaluate that whole situation. They call because they want something to happen, not because the situation calls for it. And that leads to 4 of the most common problems: calling when you shouldn't, not calling when you should, calling like a caller, not like an elk, drawing elk in versus giving away your location. This episode is going to bring clarity to all of that. You're going to walk away with an actual calling framework that keeps you from sabotaging your own opportunities. In section 1, we're going to talk about why calling is situational, not a simple script. Most hunters approach calling like it's a routine or a tactic they learned from a YouTube video. They go in thinking, I'm going to cold call here. I'm going to locate bugle now. I'm going to challenge him. I'm going to run a slow play. I'm just going to bugle until he answers. All of those strategies can work, but none of them work all of the time, and none of them work simply because you want them to. Elk calling is situational. It depends completely on the mood of the bull, the position of the cows, the terrain, the wind, the distance, the time of day, and the pressure level. The biggest mistake a lot of hunters make is trying to create action through calling rather than responding to the actual situation unfolding in front of them. Here's how situational calling works. If a bull is moving with cows, calling should be subtle and supportive. He's not looking for a fight, he wants control. Cow calls and soft contact sounds tell him the herd is stable. If a bull is alone and searching, calling can be bolder. He's vulnerable, he's curious, he's willing to talk. If a bull is bedded midday, calling is dangerous unless you know the wind perfectly. A single bad thermal shift and the bull leaves silently. If a bull is screaming his head off, Calling less often works better than calling more. The more fired up he is, the more your job is to stay invisible. If there's heavy hunting pressure, calling often hurts more than it helps. Pressured bulls know what a hunter sounds like. They know what a fake herd sounds like. They know what an unnatural sequence sounds like. Calling works, but only when it matches the reality of the situation, not the fantasy you want. In section 2, we're going to talk about why solo hunters need a completely different strategy. Most calling advice online is built around a caller-shooter team. Caller stays behind, shooter moves up, caller keeps the bull focused, shooter cuts the distance, bull comes in looking past the shooter. But when you're solo, that entire system collapses. As a solo hunter, every sound you make is linked directly to your exact location. You can't just throw a sound backwards. You can't just shift positions. You can't just anchor the bull. You can't move while calling necessarily without being heard. The moment you make a call as a solo hunter, you create a pinpoint on the map that the bull is going to check. So solo hunters often overcall because calling is exciting. They want to build the interaction. They want to feel connected to the elk. But it's the worst thing you can do when you're alone a lot of times. Solo calling rules are simple. Call far less than partnered hunters. You don't have a second body to pull the bull past you. You have to use sound sparingly. Only call when you're in position to kill. Not while hiking, not while approaching, not while repositioning, not while checking ridges. You call when you're set or not at all. Let the bull take the responsibility for closing distance. If he won't move, you move silently until the moment is right. A single soft cow call is often stronger than a full sequence. One authentic sound is believable. A whole series of perfect sounds can be suspicious. If you do bugle, bugle like a satellite, not necessarily a herd bull. A solo hunter pretending to be the dominant bull can be a disaster. The more solo hunters talk, the more bulls locate them. The less solo hunters talk, the more bulls make mistakes. In section 3, we're going to talk about why a lot of hunters don't understand cow talk. Almost every hunter who gets into elk calling wants to bugle. It's exciting. It feels powerful. You feel like you're in the game. But bugling is often the least important sound in the woods. Cow talk drives the rut. Cow talk moves herds. Cow talk builds interest. Cow talk relaxes bulls. Cow talk creates believability. But a lot of hunters misunderstand cow talk because they make the wrong sounds at the wrong time, or overuse estrus calls, or call too loudly, or don't match herd behavior, or call at unnatural intervals, or combine sounds incorrectly, or don't actually listen to what real cows sound like. So here's the truth. Real cows are boring. They don't run elaborate sequences every 2 minutes. They don't scream estrus nonstop. They don't call in predictable patterns. Most of their sounds are soft, subtle, and completely unremarkable. A real cow herd makes soft mews, content contact sounds, tiny whines, occasional chirps, infrequent assembly calls. The volume is usually low. The rhythm is irregular. The intent is subtle. The herd flows naturally. But hunters call like they're performing for the camera. They hit multiple notes, full volume, every minute. It's too clean, too produced, too rehearsed. A real cow herd is messy. That's what makes it believable. If you can master authentic cow talk, authentic, not fancy, you instantly become more dangerous than 90% of the hunters in the woods. In section 4, we're going to talk about drawing elk in versus giving away your location. And here's where things fall apart for a lot of guys. Most calling doesn't draw elk in. Most calling just gives away your location. Elk live in a world of pressure. They've heard hundreds of hunters. They've been called at from roads, ridges, meadows, and benches. They've been called at from the wrong wind direction, the wrong timing, and the wrong urgency. So when you call, you either create curiosity or you create suspicion. Drawing elk in requires proximity, realism, patience, matching mood, perfect thermals, believable timing, authentic volume, minimal noise, a setup the bull can commit to. Giving away your location requires calling too loudly, calling too often, calling from the wrong place, calling while moving, calling without the wind, forcing the interaction, sounding too perfect, not matching the mood of the herd or the bull. Here's the painful truth. If you're calling from a distance, you're usually just exposing your position, not drawing elk in. If you're calling without a plan for what happens next, you're creating uncertainty, not opportunity. If you're calling without cover, elk are going to hang up. They want to see the source of the sound. If you're calling downhill, the bull will circle to wind you every time. If you're calling uphill, the bull will slow down and wait for confirmation. If you're calling in open terrain, bulls refuse to commit. They know exactly where the sound should be coming from. Elk want confirmation. If they can't get it visually or through the wind, they won't close the distance. You don't mess up the call, you mess up the direction, the location, or the timing of your call. In section 5, we want to talk about how to fix overcalling and undercalling. Here's a practical framework. I want to give you a simple field-tested framework that keeps you from blowing your chances. So I want you to start with silence. Let the mountain tell you what mood the elk are in before you contribute. When in doubt, cow call softly and once, not a sequence, not a performance, one believable sound. Respond to the bull. Don't try to control the bull. He will tell you what he's willing to do. Remember, most solo hunters should bugle sparingly. Bugling is a great tool, but not an identity. Don't call until you're in the right position to kill. Calling while approaching ruins a lot of opportunities. Don't overcall a fired up bull. Let him talk. Let him escalate. Rake instead of calling. Let him make the mistakes. Don't undercall a timid bull. A single soft cow sound can give him the confidence to move. Don't call from open ground. Elk want terrain features for confirmation. Don't call without understanding the wind. Calling the wrong wind is handing the bull your position. Calling is an art, not a routine. But when you understand some of these situational factors and the difference between attraction and exposure, you become a far more lethal elk hunter. Overcalling and undercalling come from the same root problem. Hunters calling based on emotion instead of situation. Calling because you want action. Calling because you're excited. Calling because you're frustrated. Calling because you feel like you have to make something happen. When you shift from emotional calling to situational calling, everything changes. You stop chasing bulls. You stop educating bulls. You stop blowing setups. You stop calling at the wrong time. And you begin working with the herd, not against it. You start sounding like a real elk, not a hunter pretending to be one. And you start getting bulls to commit because your calls fit the moment, the mood, and the mountain. Welcome to Backbone Unlimited. My name is Matt Hartsky. In this episode, we're breaking down one of the most common and most painful reasons elk hunters burn days without ever getting into elk: poor e-scouting and choosing terrain that simply does not hold elk when you're hunting. This is one of the biggest reasons hunters think there are no elk in my unit. The elk are there, but you're hunting terrain they haven't used in weeks. E-scouting is an incredible tool. It helps you understand access, elevation, escape routes, drainages, benches, bedding pockets, travel corridors, water sources, burns, saddles, and transition zones. It helps you enter a hunt with a plan. But maps don't tell you what elk are actually doing. Maps tell you what the terrain is capable of, not what elk prefer in the specific conditions you're hunting. And when hunters rely too heavily on the map or build their entire September strategy around food, water, bedding triangles that look perfect on satellite imagery, they end up wasting days in what I call dead zones. Terrain that looks textbook but holds nothing. Today we're breaking down why maps lie, why timber bulls live where nobody wants to hike, how elevation bands shift throughout September, where pressure pockets push elk, why certain terrain is a complete waste of time. Let's get into it. In section 1, we're going to talk about why maps lie and why hunters get trapped by them. Most hunters don't realize that the map is a trap unless you know how elk think. Maps lie because they hide the two things that control elk behavior: pressure and security. Maps don't show you boot tracks, glassing pressure, ATV noise, access patterns, camp locations, horse trains, historic trail use, midday thermal behavior, shade to sun transition timing, how thick that open timber really is, where the elk were bumped yesterday. A map can only show you a meadow. It can't show you if that meadow gets pounded by every hunter in the drainage. A map can show you a wallow. It can't tell you if that wallow has been dry for 2 months. A map can show you the perfect saddle. It can't show you the wind swirls there 90% of the time. A map can show you scattered pockets of timber, but it can't tell you in which pocket holds a thermal advantage the bulls prefer. And this is where poor e-scouting destroys hunts. Hunters walk into beautiful, wide open glassable terrain that looks ideal, but the elk left weeks ago because too many hunters also thought it looked ideal. If your season fell apart this year because you hiked into spots that looked amazing and found absolutely nothing, this is probably your culprit. Maps aren't wrong, they're incomplete. You must know how to read the map the way elk read the mountain. In section 2, we're going to talk about why timber bulls live where nobody wants to hike. Here's the truth most hunters don't want to accept. Mature bulls live in terrain you'd never voluntarily hike through. Thick, steep, nasty, north-facing, shadowed, deadfall-filled, dark, tight, quiet, wind-protected, barely traveled. Those pockets don't show up well on satellite imagery. They don't stand out as classic elk country. They're usually not green enough, open enough, or pretty enough for e-scouting, and that's exactly why elk use them. Timber bulls live where hunters don't want to go. Side hill benches with uneven footing, dark timber strips between drainages, small shaded pockets right off main ridges, blowdown jungles, finger ridges too small to show up on the map, micro basins that look insignificant from above. Those aren't backup areas. Those are primary bedding zones for pressured elk. A mature bull doesn't choose terrain based on how it looks. He chooses terrain based on wind stability, thermal predictability, cover density, escape options, sound dampening, cow security, line of sight advantage, and predator risk. Maps don't show those kind of details. Only boots on the ground reveal them. If you spent too much time this year in beautiful elk country without ever hearing or seeing a bull, it's because you were hunting what you thought elk wanted, not what elk actually wanted. In section 3, we're going to talk about elevation bands and how those change throughout September and how a lot of hunters don't adjust for them. Elk don't just stay in the same elevation band the entire month. Their elevation shifts depend on temperature, pressure, rut phase, available feed, cows moving or not moving, water distribution, snowpack, human pressure. A lot of hunters pick one elevation band based on e-scouting and stay committed to it the entire hunt, and that's a mistake. Here's how elevation actually works in September. In early September, we're talking maybe the 1st through the 10th, elk are often higher. They prefer cooler timber pockets. Bulls are staging, cows are scattered, little rut activity. High basins can still produce. Mid-September, maybe the 10th through the 20th, the rut barely starts to kick in. Cows consolidate. Bulls follow cow elevation, not your expectations. This can pull elk slightly lower into mixed timber. In later September, the 20th through the 30th, bulls push into safer elevation zones. Cows seek security more than feed. Wind patterns matter more. Elk often settle into the comfort line, which is anywhere from 8,000 to 9,500 feet, depending on your area. The mistake a lot of hunters make is they pre-select an elevation and grind it to death. Elk shifted days ago, and hunters didn't shift with them. This is why some hunters hike into basins that look perfect but feel totally dead. They're hunting August elk in a September world. If you didn't adjust your elevation band when the rut shifted, you likely hunted right past the elk this year. In section 4, we're going to talk about pressure pockets, where elk go when the unit turns into a zoo. Pressure pockets are the most important part of September a lot of places, and almost nobody talks about them. These are the spots elk slide into when hunting pressure hits the main drainages. Pressure pockets are small, they're overlooked, they're off angle, they're off wind, they're off access, they're annoying to reach, annoying to hunt, physically exhausting, impossible to glass. Usually not marked as classic elk habitat. These pockets are often small benches on the opposite side of the drainage. Short north-facing strips 200 to 400 feet below the ridge. side pockets that require a steep drop to even reach, tiny bowls between two or more popular access corridors, a band of dark timber just above the main trail, a chute with perfect thermals and good escape route, a no-name ridge that looks insignificant on a map. You would never choose these locations if you relied solely on your e-scouting, but the elk will because they're safe. Pressure pockets are the difference between being an elk or hiking 10 empty miles every day. You find pressure pockets by asking questions like, where is the average hunter not going? Where does the wind stay consistent? Where can elk escape quickly? Where can they see danger before it reaches them? Where is the noise lower? Where is the shade more reliable? If your season felt crowded and you kept bumping into hunters but never into elk, it's because you didn't find the pressure pockets, but the elk did. In section 5, we're going to talk about the dead zones, the terrain hunters waste days in. This is the painful part. Dead zones are everywhere and they look so good on a map. Dead zones can include meadows close to trailheads. The elk left long before the season started and a lot of hunters still go there out of habit. Perfect looking basins that lack shade or cover. Great feed, great edges, terrible midday wind stability. Saddles with swirling wind. Looks perfect for travel. Elk never use them during daylight because the wind never stabilizes. Big open south slopes. They're warm, but the wind is volatile and zero security. High elevation bowls with morning thermals that fall straight into bedding. Elk no hunters will push from above. They don't bed there during pressure. Long ridges with no benches. Elk need predictability in thermals. Benchless ridges don't offer as much protection. Flat ridge tops. The wind sinks. The wind swirls. Elk avoid mid-slope death traps. The reason dead zones burn so many tags is because hunters commit too early to a spot that looks good on imagery but fails every real-world elk test. If you spent multiple days in a basin that looked perfect but never felt alive, there's a reason. It was a dead zone. The elk weren't there. They weren't coming back. Great hunters abandon dead zones early. Struggling hunters hold on to them for too long. Poor e-scouting and hunting the wrong terrain is the silent season killer a lot of hunters don't even recognize until the hunt is over. When you rely too much on what looks good from above instead of what elk actually prefer on the ground, you spend more time searching than hunting. Maps show possibilities. Only elk behavior shows reality. If you want to fix your season next year, accept that maps lie. Learn where timber bulls really live. Adjust elevation bands weekly, not yearly. Find pressure pockets. Abandon dead zones early and aggressively. You're going to stop hunting the elk country and start hunting the elk. Welcome to Backbone Unlimited. My name is Matt Hartsky. In this episode, we're talking about one of the most painful, overlooked, and brutally honest reasons elk season falls apart for a lot of hunters: unrealistic time expectations. Guys head into September thinking a 3, 4, or 5 day hunt is more than enough. Only walk out of the woods shocked that they never even had a real opportunity. They think elk weren't talking or weren't in the unit or were pressured too hard, but most of the time the real culprit is the clock. Time is the invisible predator that ruins more hunts than weather, pressure, moon phases, or calling mistakes. When you don't give yourself enough time or when you misuse the time you have, the mountain punishes you instantly. Elk operate on tight daily patterns, slow rotations, and unpredictable movement windows. The hunter who needs everything to happen in 3 days almost never gets the chance. Today, we're breaking down 4 hard truths that a lot of hunters don't want to admit. Why a 3 to 5 day hunt almost always fails. Why you need a morning and evening pattern before moving areas. Why guys bail from good sign way too early. Why guys hunt too fast and burn the very opportunities they're chasing. If your season didn't work out this year and you walked away feeling like you ran out of time, this episode is going to hit home. Let's get into it. In section 1, why 3 to 5 day hunts almost always fail. A lot of hunters still treat elk hunting like it's a whitetail trip or a long weekend adventure. They plan to drive in Friday, hunt Saturday, Sunday, Monday, drive home Tuesday, hoping everything lines up. But here's the truth. A 3 to 5 day elk hunt is basically one long scouting trip, not necessarily a hunt. You're going to spend day 1 trying to locate elk, day 2 understanding their movement, day 3 figuring out the wind and terrain, day 4 adjusting, day 5 finally being in the right place at the right time. It takes 3 days minimum to even begin understanding where elk bed, where elk feed, where elk transition, where they go when pressured, where they are at dawn, where they are at dusk, where they move midday, which direction they favor during thermals, where they break patterns when bumped. You can't gather that in a single morning or a single evening. You can't gather that with a single bugle response. You can't gather that with a single track line. It takes repetition, it takes pattern recognition, and it takes time. A 3-day hunt gives elk 1 chance to make a mistake. A 10-day hunt gives you 20 more chances. Elk aren't impossible, they're simply not on your schedule. Hunters don't fail because there are no elk. Hunters fail because they only give themselves enough time for luck, not success. In section 2, we're going to talk about why you need a morning and evening pattern before moving. This is something almost no one talks about, but it is one of the biggest differences between hunters who get into elk consistently and hunters who see nothing. You must establish a morning pattern and an evening pattern before deciding an area is empty. That takes 2 morning sits and 2 evening sits, or 1 structured full day observation. If you hunt an area one morning and say, no elk here, you're hunting hope, not reality. Elk move in extremely tight windows. 20-minute morning feeding windows, 15-minute bedding transitions, or 30-minute evening movement periods. If you miss that window, you think the basin is empty, but the elk were there. You were just late, early, or facing the wrong direction. So here's the truth. You need 2 full cycles to know if an area is dead. 1 cycle is luck, 2 cycles is information. Elk might talk one morning and go silent the next. If you bail early, you miss the real pattern. Elk may move one ridge over only during the evening. If you only hunt mornings, you miss them entirely. Elk may only be present during low pressure windows. If you show up when other hunters show up, you think they're gone, but they were there an hour earlier. Elk may be cycling through a 48-hour loop. If you quit after 12 hours, you never see the loop. Hunters who give an area 2 full cycles succeed far more than hunters who jump drainages daily. Most hunters don't know the area. They only know one moment in that area. Patterns require time. Without time, there's nothing to pattern. In section 3, we're going to talk about why guys bail from good sign too early. This is a heartbreaking problem because it destroys more opportunities than a lot of guys realize. Most hunters quit areas that are actually prime. I see it all the time. Fresh tracks, fresh poop, active trails, rubbed trees, bedding depressions, day-old wallows, push marks in the mud, fresh cow chatter, yet the hunter leaves because they didn't hear a bugle that morning. Here's the truth. Sign is a 24-hour window into elk behavior. Bugles are a 5-second window. If you're only relying on bugling to confirm elk presence, you're hunting with the wrong tool. Bulls go silent when they're pressured, or they're moving, or cows are nervous, or they're mid-transition, or thermals are unstable, or the wind is swirling, or they're shadowing another herd, or they're on the edge of bedding zones. Silence does not mean absence. Most hunters think no bugles means no elk, but the more pressured the elk are, the quieter they get. You bail too early, you abandon fresh sign. You walk away from the herd's actual living space. You're leaving just as the elk settle into their real pattern. Hunters need to understand 2 hours of silence means nothing. 1 morning of silence really doesn't mean anything. Even a full day of silence can mean nothing if the sign is fresh. If the sign says elk are living there, you hunt it boldly, methodically, and patiently until you know their rhythm. If you leave before you understand the rhythm, you're not hunting elk, you're just chasing noise. In section 4, we're going to talk about why guys hunt too fast. This is one of the most devastating mistakes hunters make, and it's almost always tied to unrealistic expectations. When hunters feel rushed, they move too quickly. They stop glassing early. They hike through feeding areas instead of around them. They climb ridges instead of side hilling. They talk too much. They call too much. They approach without letting the thermals stabilize. They blow stalks because they're running out of time. Rushing ruins more opportunities than almost anything else. Most guys hike like they have somewhere to be. but the elk don't. The elk move slow. Elk pause. Elk stage. Elk change elevation bands quietly. Elk take the path with the best wind advantage, not the fastest one. Elk feed in small pockets, not just giant meadows. Elk bed in micro benches that hunters walk right past. When you hunt too fast, you miss the entire mountain. You walk past fresh tracks. You walk past fresh beds. You walk past fresh poop. You blow thermals before they stabilize. You're never in the right place at the right time. You're always reacting instead of anticipating. Hunting fast is almost always a symptom of panic, and panic is born from unrealistic expectations. Slow hunters kill elk, fast hunters chase elk. If your season didn't work out because you felt like you were always behind, always late, or always almost there, this is probably why. You weren't too slow, you were too fast. Unrealistic time expectations sabotage more elk seasons than most hunters realize. When your hunt window is too short or when you move too fast because of time pressure, you lose the ability to establish patterns, understand terrain, read the wind, follow the herds, interpret sign, adjust elevation, decipher pressure, make strategic decisions, and capitalize on opportunities. Elk hunting is a long game pursuit. Time is the advantage, time is the teacher, and time is the pattern. When you give yourself enough time and when you slow down enough to actually see the mountain for what it is, September starts to make sense in a way it never has before. Welcome to Backbone Unlimited. My name is Matt Hartsky. In this episode, we're talking about something most elk hunters completely ignore, even though it's one of the biggest reasons seasons fall apart: fatigue, discipline, and burnout. Gear matters, calling matters, wind definitely matters, e-scouting matters, strategy matters. But all of that becomes useless, instantly useless, when you get tired, sloppy, impatient, mentally worn down, or physically unprepared for the stress of September. Elk hunting exposes people. It exposes how you think, how you react to adversity, how disciplined you really are, how well you prepared long before you stepped onto the mountain. The truth is simple. Fatigue destroys opportunity. Discipline creates opportunity. And burnout is the silent killer that sneaks in right when you felt like you should be getting stronger. Today we're breaking down why slowing down actually improves your odds, why mental fatigue destroys stocks and setups, why lack of preseason training always shows up on day 5 and later, why elk hunting becomes psychological warfare, not just a physical contest. If your season fell apart late in the hunt, if you made mistakes on day 4 or 5 that you never would have made on day 1, or if you left the mountain feeling defeated mentally more than physically, this is the episode you needed. So let's get into it. In section 1, we're going to talk about when people slow down, their odds improve. This is something a lot of hunters never learn. Elk hunting is not a fast person's game. It's a disciplined person's game. Everybody shows up excited. Everyone wants to put miles on. Everyone wants to see what's over the next ridge. Everybody wants to move until they find elk. But the longer I've hunted, the more experience I've gained, the more mistakes I've seen, the clearer this truth becomes. The slower you go, the faster success comes. When people slow down, they notice sign, they read tracks, they interpret trails correctly, they feel the thermals instead of guessing, they glass longer and catch movement, they hear soft cow talk, they move with purpose, not emotion, they avoid blowing out elk they didn't know were there. Fast hunters walk past elk. Fast hunters blow stalks. Fast hunters miss the details that matter. Going slow isn't laziness, it's discipline. The hardest thing in September is controlling your excitement long enough to hunt methodically. When you slow down, you stop reacting and start observing. You start making decisions based on information instead of adrenaline. Most hunters hunt like they're in a race. Successful hunters hunt like they're solving a puzzle. Discipline beats speed every single time. In section 2, we're going to talk about why mental fatigue kills stocks. Because physical fatigue is real, but mental fatigue is what actually ruins hunts. Your legs can be tired and you can still kill a bull. But once your mind breaks down, your season is done. Mental fatigue affects your patience, your shot execution, decision making, wind discipline, awareness, Timing, ability to sit still, ability to wait through a thermal switch, ability to read herd behavior, ability to stalk correctly, ability to stay sharp late in the day. One wrong thought leads to one wrong step. One wrong step leads to one wrong thermal push. One wrong thermal push, and that bull you've been shadowing for 4 days is gone. Mental fatigue is also why hunters bugle when they shouldn't, call too much, rush stalks, get frustrated, change drainages too early, forget to check the wind, move when they should sit, sit when they should close, lose confidence, start doubting their plan, and start doubting themselves. Elk hunting is emotional, especially when it's not going well. You feel like time is slipping away. You feel like every decision is life or death for the hunt. You feel like you have to make something happen. This is mental pressure, and it compounds every day. And by day 4, 5, and later, hunters fall apart mentally long before they fall apart physically. Mental fatigue kills stalks because it erodes the one thing you absolutely need in September: precision. Elk hunting is not about doing 10 things well. It's about doing one thing right at the exact right moment. And you can't do that if your mind is fried. In section 3, we're going to talk about why lack of preseason training shows up on day 5 and later. You can't hide from preparation, not in the mountains. You can be strong enough for day 1, day 2, maybe day 3, but day 5 reveals everything. Day 5 exposes the truth, and here's why. Your legs are tired, not just fatigued, tired in a way that affects balance, stability, and control. Your lungs aren't adapting. Altitude finally catches you and your efficiency drops. You feel slower. Your joints ache. Angled terrain, side hilling, deadfall, long stalks, they all pile up. Your posture breaks down. This affects breathing, shooting form, and concentration. Your recovery window shrinks. You don't bounce back between the days of long hiking. Your calorie deficit starts hitting. You can be eating constantly and still burning more than you take in. The physical decline is real, but here's the part a lot of hunters miss. Physical decline is the gateway to mental decline. When your body is tired, you get frustrated faster. You make impulsive decisions. You lose discipline. You quit setups early. You get sloppy with wind. You call when you should be silent. You push too hard when you should be slow and patient. You bail on patterns that were just about to pay off. Elk hunting punishes lack of preparation not on day 1, but usually on day 5 and later. And everyone wants to believe that grit or mental toughness or adrenaline is going to carry them through. No. The preparation carries you through. Training carries you through. Discipline carries you through. When you break down physically, your mind collapses. When your mind collapses, your season collapses. If your hunt fell apart late in the week, this is probably exactly why. In section 4, we're going to talk about why elk hunting becomes psychological warfare. This is the part almost nobody talks about, but is the core truth of September. Elk hunting is psychological warfare, not just with the elk, but with yourself, because it tests patience, your frustration tolerance, your discipline, your ability to stick to a plan, your ability to trust your instincts, your ability to handle silence, your ability to handle failure, your ability to handle doubt, your ability to show up again tomorrow, and your ability to grind through discomfort. Every day you wake up tired, every day you feel pressure. Every day you start questioning whether you chose the right drainage. Every day you wonder if you should move or stay. Every day you wonder if you're wasting time. Elk hunting becomes psychological warfare because it puts you in a prolonged state of uncertainty, fatigue, hope, disappointment, pressure, frustration, and second guessing. And unlike other types of hunting, elk hunting gives you very few wins to keep you motivated. You might hunt 10 days for one real opportunity. You might hunt 6 days to hear a bugle. You might shadow elk for hours only to lose them in a single gust of wind. And that starts to wear guys down. By day 5 or 6, the mountain is no longer testing just your lungs, it's testing your mind. The guys who kill elk consistently aren't just the ones who can hike the fastest or shoot the furthest. They're the ones who don't break down mentally. They're the ones who maintain discipline when the mountain is at its worst. They're the ones who don't let fatigue trick them into quitting on an area too soon. Elk hunting is chess, not checkers, and the hardest opponent is yourself. Fatigue, discipline, and burnout are three of the biggest silent killers in elk hunting. They don't show up on a map, they don't show up in your calling strategy, they don't show up in your gear list, but they show up in every single decision you make, every stalk, every setup, every approach, every moment where discipline matters most. Slowing down improves your odds. Mental fatigue kills precision. Lack of preseason training destroys your hunt on day 5. And the entire month becomes psychological warfare the second the excitement wears off. If you want your next hunt to be different, if you want to hold it together when other hunters break, this is where the work begins. Welcome to Backbone Unlimited. My name is Matt Hartsky. In this episode, we're breaking down what I believe is one of the biggest, most overlooked reasons elk seasons fall apart for so many hunters: not having a repeatable system. Not a calling system, not a gear system, not a shooting system, a hunting system. A daily structure that gives you consistency, direction, and purpose every hour you're on the mountain. Most hunters hunt randomly. They might wake up late. They might wander ridges. They might glass at the wrong times. They pick drainages based on mood instead of intel. They hunt where they feel good instead of where the elk are. They move without a plan. They give up too early. They second guess everything. They react instead of execute. The difference between hunters who consistently get into elk and hunters who hope to get into elk is simple. Successful hunters run a system. Struggling hunters run emotions. Today we're breaking down how to build and run a repeatable elk hunting system. A morning routine that puts you in the right place at the right time. A systematic approach to checking basins and terrain. Wind planning that removes guesswork from stalks and calling. Backup plans that keep the hunt productive instead of frantic. Clear evening objectives so every day ends with information, and a daily reset process that rebuilds confidence and focus. If your season felt chaotic, confusing, random, or reactive, this is probably why, so let's get into it. In section 1, we're going to talk about having a morning routine, your foundation for the entire day, and also how your morning routine sets the tone for your entire hunt. Yet most hunters have no routine at all. They hit snooze, they hike half awake, they get to their glassing knob late, they start calling too early, they blow thermals because they didn't account for sunrise timing, they approach elk uphill when the thermals are rising, and because they're rushed, a morning routine gives them structure to the single most time-sensitive window of the day. And so here's a repeatable, disciplined morning system that works. Wake up early enough to reach your first objective in complete darkness. Not sunrise, not gray light, not I'll get there when the thermals switch. In the dark. This keeps you invisible. You move without alerting elk. You beat other hunters to key terrain. Arrive at your glassing or listening point 30 minutes before legal light. That gives your eyes and ears time to settle. It lets the mountain wake up around you instead of you waking it up. Stay silent until movement dictates your next step. No call calling, no location bugles, no warming up your diaphragm. Just listen. Evaluate wind direction and thermal timing. Not the forecast, the actual conditions in front of you. Falling air until the sun hits it. Rising air once the slope heats. Falling again when the shadows creep in. Move with discipline, not emotion. Your morning shouldn't be chaotic. It should be predictable. It should feel like steps, not guesses. If your morning feels like a rush, your entire day becomes a chase. A morning system prevents that. In section 2, we're going to talk about how to systematically check basins without wasting days. Randomly checking basins is one of the fastest ways to burn a hunt with nothing to show for it. A systematic approach means understanding how elk should use that basin, how thermals behave there, where bedding should be, where feeding should be, where the basin funnels movement, where pressure pushes elk, when the basin is active, morning versus evening, how long to give it before moving on. Most hunters glass a basin once, hear nothing, and leave. Here's how systematic basin checking works. Check the basin from the best elevation, not the closest. Observe both morning and evening movement before deciding. One window is never enough. 2 windows reveal patterns. Examine micro-terrain bedding pockets. Elk rarely bed where hunters want them to. Know the dark holes, know the benches, know the shaded strips. Track the thermals and wind cycles inside the basin. If the basin never stabilizes thermals, it's not worth hunting, even if elk use it. Only move if the sign is old, the basin has no feed, the thermals are unreliable, pressure is overwhelming, or your pattern is inconsistent after 2 full cycles. Systematic basin checking turns a giant mountain range into a solvable grid instead of a guessing game. In section 3, we're going to talk about wind planning. Most hunters don't actually have a plan. This is the most misunderstood part of elk hunting systems. Hunters react to wind, but successful hunters plan for wind. Wind planning includes knowing where thermals fall in the morning, knowing when the slope heats, estimating when the thermal switch will start, identifying terrain where the switch delays, avoiding drainages during falling thermals, anticipating where elk will bed based on wind stability. A repeatable wind plan looks like picking your route based on the morning thermal direction. If thermals are falling, you approach from below. If thermals are rising, you approach from above. Bypass terrain that traps scent, like chutes, bowls, benches with cross drafts. Avoid them until thermals are stable. Base your midday plan around stable thermals. Hunt slopes that have been heated long enough to create consistent rising air. Reposition before afternoon shadows hit. When the shade falls, thermals are going to start falling fast. If you don't pre-position downhill, you're going to lose the herd. Translate wind patterns into elk patterns. Elk position themselves to maximize scent advantage, so you should as well. A wind plan transforms the entire hunt. Instead of improvising every setup, you're anticipating every move. In section 4, we're going to talk about backup plans, the system that keeps you from panicking. The best hunters don't just have one plan, they have 5. A backup plan isn't a maybe, it's part of the system, and it keeps the hunt productive even when things fall apart. Your backup plan hierarchy should look like Plan A, your primary objective, where you believe elk should be based on sign, wind, terrain, pressure, and patterns. Plan B, your elevation shift. If elk aren't in Plan A, they move slightly up or down. You already know where to check next. Plan C, your pressure pocket, a nasty, overlooked pocket where pressured elk retreat. This is where a lot of hunters should be hunting in the first place. Plan D, your midday terrain. This is the terrain you go to once thermals stabilize. Think benches, side hill timber, and travel routes. Plan E, your scouting fallback. If everything fails, this is your recon route. Not random hiking, but targeted information gathering. When you have this hierarchy in place, you're never going to panic, you're never going to rush, and you never have to guess. A system removes the emotion, because emotion kills hunts, systems save hunts. In section 5, we're going to talk about evening objectives. Most hunters waste the late afternoon. Evening hunts are often misunderstood. A lot of hunters treat evenings as bonus time, an afterthought after a long day. But evenings reveal as much information as mornings and often more. Your evening system should have clear objectives. Identify where elk leave bedding. They usually move predictably. Side hill to a feed pocket, to a staging area, to an open edge. Identify where thermals start falling. This tells you where elk feel safe moving. Identify where the herd transitions before dark. Those transition zones become tomorrow's morning setups. Avoid calling or overcalling. Evenings are for information, for plans. You're building tomorrow's strategy. Position yourself for first light success. Never end the day randomly. Always end the day in a way that sets up tomorrow's kill window. Most hunters hike back to camp at the best time of day instead of learning where elk are living. Evening objectives turn the last hour of light into your most valuable source of next morning intel. In section 6, we're going to talk about the daily reset process, the secret to long hunt success. Every hunter should reset mentally, physically, and strategically at the end of every day, but almost nobody does. The daily reset is the backbone of your entire system. Without it, the hunt devolves into chaos by day 3, 4, 5. Your reset should include a terrain review. Where were the elk? Where weren't they? What elevation produced the most sign? Where did pressure push them? Where did the wind stabilize best? A pattern review. What did you learn about feeding windows, bedding windows, travel corridors, silent transitions, pressure behavior? A mistake review. What cost you today? Not emotionally, tactically. Was it the wind, your speed, calling, positioning, timing? a plan for tomorrow, not a hope, a plan, a real system, a structured approach based on information, not desperation. A psychological reset. Fatigue breeds randomness, and randomness breeds failure. Take 15 minutes to regain clarity, not on your phone, not scrolling, not thinking about home. Just reset your mind for the next day. This is the piece almost nobody does. It's also the piece that will change your season the fastest. Not having a repeatable system is one of the core reasons elk seasons fall apart. The mountain rewards discipline, not randomness. It rewards systems, not emotion. Hunters who run a structured approach find elk more consistently, understand elk more deeply, and capitalize on opportunities more reliably. A system gives you clarity instead of chaos, strategy instead of guessing, consistency instead of frustration, confidence instead of doubt. If your season felt scattered, rushed, confusing, or reactionary, that might be why. A structured hunter is a dangerous hunter. A disciplined hunter is a successful hunter. A system-based hunter is a consistent hunter. If you want to build a real system for next season, not random tactics, not scattered ideas, but an actual blueprint that you follow every day of the hunt, that's exactly why I built Team Backbone. It's more than a membership. It's a way to sharpen your edge with exclusive tools, strategies, and a tribe of hunters who refuse to quit. Inside, you're going to get 20% off site-wide on all Backbone Unlimited gear, a member-only t-shirt shipped to your door every month, not available anywhere else, full access to the digital content vault of guides, checklists, fitness and backcountry strategies, and mindset training, a private Facebook group with direct access to me, and a community of driven hunters who live relentlessly, direct call, text, or email access to me for personalized advice on training, hunting strategy, or sharpening your edge, and automatic entry into monthly gear giveaways. If you're ready to stop hunting randomly and start hunting with a real system, Team Backbone is waiting for you at backboneunlimited.com underneath the membership tab. Thanks for being here. Until next time, train harder, hunt smarter, and never settle.